There we are, recording soon.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another Friday webinar with Pioneer B1. We are always happy to put these webinars together and share features and functionality of SAP Business One and dive deeper into core processes that can really help improve your experience in SAP and get more out of your system. This webinar and all past webinars are available on our YouTube channel that you can reference later or share with your team as needed. We have quite the collection going up there now, so check it out. Throughout today's webinar, if we touch on anything that you would like to dive into in more detail later on, we are always looking for new webinar topics to cover. We actually have set up a link that Beth has just put into the chat where you can always put topics for webinars that we can explore and present in the future. My name is Ben Grassi. I'm a senior consultant with Pioneer B1, and I am always excited to be presenting with Beth Cameron. Beth, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm glad to be back for another webinar this month, second to last one of the year, and had a little bit of a hiatus in webinars as more of the team was joining and presenting different things throughout the year. So really excited to be back and, just continue to plan more learning opportunities for you guys next year.
Yes, Beth calls it a hiatus, but she's just been pawning them off on me.
Exactly.
But Beth and I are always have so much fun preparing these webinars and making sure we put the best content together for all of you. Today, we are going to be working on more of the administrative side of SAP, and this is not meant to be a super technical review of SAP, so have no fear, don't zone out on us. We're not writing code, setting up networks, or anything like that. But we will be focusing on the high-level admin tasks that can be done in SAP by your own in-house SAP super users. A lot of these questions that we get throughout the year usually come to us in support, but your super users in each of your systems do have the capabilities to do all these, so we want to educate and help provide you with these tips and tricks along the way. So we'll be going over these tasks and showing you how to explore and implement some of these features. Our objective for today, as we said, give you some of that administrative foundational knowledge that is available in SAP in different settings, tools, and utilities. Our agenda, we're going to start off with Beth going through a couple general settings at the company level, and then we're going to break it down into one of our most frequently asked questions in support about setting up a new user in the system and everything that goes into that. We'll be talking about licenses, authorizations, and how to set those up. We'll be turning it into more of a how SAP looks with form settings and UI configuration. And then we'll help make your life a little bit easier as we talk about some tools to streamline user onboarding. We'll wrap up with some of the tips and tricks that we were talking about earlier, utilities in SAP that you might find useful as you troubleshoot issues or implement new functionality. And as always, we'll end with some documentation and open it up for QA. Throughout today, if you do have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. We'll answer them as we go, or we'll catch them at the end. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Beth, who's going to get us started. Most of the presentation today will be a live demo, as always. So thank you, and throw any questions you have in the chat, and Beth, I'll let you go.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Ben, for the intro and the agenda of what we're looking at today. So, of course, just like, the beginning of any fun administrative tools webinar, we're going to look at general settings first. So these are some of the settings that are applied to the entire company. As we move forward in the webinar, we're going to be digging into some of these settings on the user level and how we can really customize that. But first, we wanted to start out really broad. So some of these settings may have been defined when you first implemented SAP or first began using your system. But what if your requirements or your processes have changed as your business grows? These are some things that you may need to know in terms of having tools in your tool belt and kind of some settings that you may need to change as you go. So first, we want to jump into the general settings. You can find this under the administration menu on the left-hand side. It'll be under administration, system initialization, and then our general settings here. I popped it in my common functions so I can get to it really easily. The four main tabs that we want to look at as it relates to our general settings are services, display, font and background, and path. So on our services tab, all of this on the right-hand side, those are the kind of more technical things that, as Ben mentioned, we're not going to dive into that piece in this webinar, but if you are interested in the more technical sides of administration of SAP, feel free to let us know. We can always do a webinar on that as well. In terms of some of the more basic services settings in SAP, all of these on the left-hand side are what we want to look at. So first and foremost, this services piece at the beginning of each session, a couple of different settings that I like to have turned on or would recommend at the company level. First being this perform data check. So that is as recommended by SAP to keep that on. It essentially just does a little check with the database, with the tables, and makes sure that everything's good at the beginning of the session. Outside of that, for any of your users, and this may be something on a user by user level that's more helpful to set up, but we have our recurring transactions and recurring postings, like our recurring journal entries. Having this set up here at the company level means that every time the users log in, if they have recurring postings or recurring transactions that are scheduled that day, it comes up as soon as you log in and you're able to execute those and move along. Same idea here with our alerts and our inbox for new messages. So if you are a company that's relying a lot on alerts or different messages or things in your inbox to drive workflows within the company, I would recommend having these settings turned on so that your users are really easily able to see new messages when they come in, respond to them, all of that. Now, this ties into it, this update messages as well. If you are a company that uses your alerts quite a bit, I would have this set more frequently so that users are getting alerts in a timely manner. And if you don't use alerts or messages as frequently, I would say let's extend this time just to kind of have the best performance possible there. In terms of some other general settings here, the display, font, and background tabs are fairly self-explanatory, but there's a couple things to note here, or a couple tips and tricks that we wanted to share. So first of all, display, like I said, all of this fairly self-explanatory, but in terms of one tip around this, so as the super user in your company, you may be logging into multiple databases. So you might be in production or your main database, but also may use the sandbox database a bit for testing. So what we like to recommend for our clients is on this color, this little color drop down here, that in your sandbox, maybe you change this to lemon or pink or something like that. And this color box is what defines all of these different forms in SAP, essentially what color they are. So it gives you a really easy way to, remind yourself that, hey, I'm in the sandbox, I'm okay to move forward with some testing, or, hey, my forms aren't pink, that must mean I'm in production, so better not enter all of these invoices or things like that. Outside of that, we'll dive into UI templates a little bit more coming up, but this is the place where you would set a default set of UI templates, or essentially how SAP will look for the whole company. Font and background on that same breath, along with our display. And then the path tab, a couple important things here. So this is what defines the path for different things in SAP, like pictures that are attached to your item master, or attachments on any of your documents in SAP. So if in the case that you have a user that says that they're getting an error when they're trying to attach a document, it's worth checking out this company setting and making sure that maybe that new user doesn't have the Windows rights to be able to go to that file path or something like that. So this is where you would check that. Also, if you are changing environments or maybe moving where your attachments are stored to a different drive or things like that, you are able to refresh paths in documents so that you don't lose the connection between let's say, any attachments you have on your sales orders, and actually being able to open those attachments from the sales order. So that's where we would see that refresh paths in documents. Wonderful. And so if you do have any questions on those, like Ben said, feel free to pop them in the chat. Otherwise, we'll keep moving along to a couple of the next setup or general settings pieces. So the next one that I wanted to cover is print preferences. So again, Ben will cover how we can set this on the user by user level, but in general at the company level, we may have a need to automate the printing, emailing, or exporting of certain documents when they're added. So instead of putting that responsibility on the user to have to remember to do that after they've added a sales order, a lot of times a sales order, an invoice, any of these documents, they may be adding multiple at a time, and it's a little overbearing sometimes to try and remember to have to do that after each one. So for any of the documents in this list, in our print preferences, we're able to determine when a document is added, or in some cases when a document is awaiting approval, how we would like some automation around that. So a lot of times, like for my sales order, I'll have that as an email so that automatically this order confirmation is emailed to the client with our email subject of the order acknowledgement, and that way just kind of automates the process, makes it a lot easier for the users. Another one here being message preferences. So we've all seen on different different documents in the system, like the sales order, if we've updated the delivery date, it asks us every time, do you want to update the existing table rows with a new delivery date? There's a lot of other examples of this throughout the system. You can see another one here with my bill of materials. And so there is that little checkbox there where we can say, yes, I always want it to update the row delivery date. Don't ask me again. But in some cases, like I said, your business processes may change. And so this is where we would reset that and say, hey, maybe we don't always want that default answer to be yes. So we can remove that here, update it. And now next time we go to, do that same action on the sales order, we'll be asked that question again. This one is something that if it is on a user by user basis, you'll want to log into the user's account or log in with the user and show them how we can update this message preference here. All right, last couple things. So our tooltip preview. This is something I think is really important to mention because a lot of times, with a lot of our clients, I'll see that they might not be using this, and I think it can be really, really helpful in just making your job easier or giving you less clicks throughout the day. So this tooltip preview, it is enabled on a company-wide level, and it's enabled for all of these, or you can select for it to be enabled for all of these different objects. Within that, there's a series of different fields and information that you can have included in that preview. So to see how that looks, if we jump into a sales order, we always have that golden arrow where we're able to drill down and see the full record, but the tooltip preview gives us that capability to see an abbreviated amount of information there that might be helpful, as we're going through our day-to-day operations. So again, this is something enabled for the whole company. So as you turn it on, all of the users will have these same settings. And then last kind of setup piece here is our reference field links. So the reference field links are a way to automate essentially different information coming from these documents to be added to our journal entries. So this can be really helpful in terms of reporting as it relates to financial reporting and being able to slice and dice your journal entry information utilizing these different reference fields. So you can see this whole list. All of these are financial type documents or ones that will make a financial posting to your general ledger. Within that, you can see there's 12 different remarks fields that can be filled in on the journal entry. And those can all be assigned with a different piece of information coming from these documents. You can see here all of these UDFs. So I believe support was added for those in 9.3. I'd have to confirm that, but it does support bringing UDF information onto the journal entry. So it opens up a lot of possibilities for being able to track your journal entries with these different pieces of information. And just a quick view to see where that lives on our journal entry. There we are. So all of these different fields, we have our ref fields here. I have one of those hidden actually, a couple ref fields here, and then we also have them in the line level. So that's where we can store that information. All right, so any questions or anything, pop them in the chat. Otherwise, I will pass it back over to Ben to start walking through some of the user setup pieces. Let's see, Ben, are you muted maybe?
Man, you guys missed the whole first part of my whole spiel.
I know.
Anyways, let's try again. Yeah, so one of the things we get questions on a lot, especially even for existing clients or new to SAP users, is actually getting a new user set up in the system, the onboarding process, how to make sure their user and employee master is set up properly and everything's linked together so that they can access the system and use the system for the tasks they need to complete. So we wanted to walk through that and, as I mentioned earlier, provide some tips and tricks along the way. So we're actually going to start on the employee master record. So down in the employee master record, this is for you the record of an employee with your company. So SAP actually has 2 or 3 rather different ways of tracking users in the system. There's the employee master data record, there's the user record, and then there's also, if necessary, the sales employee record. And they can all be linked together, and we're going to step through all of them today. But employee master data, pretty self-explanatory here. We're just going to set one up real quick. This company hired me as a sales rep, which is funny because I'm anything but a sales rep. But we can set up some basic information here, mobile phone, all that wonderful stuff, email, all that good stuff. This linked vendor is actually a newer field, but what it allows you to do, if we had any vendors, is sometimes when you're going to pay your employees, if they are charting expenses, you can set up that employee up as a vendor and then link them here on the employee master record. So that might be something that's really important to do if you are going to be paying your employees' expenses out of SAP. A couple other things: address information, membership tab if you want to have their role. As always, these are all user definable. The Teams functionality, which is primarily a sales functionality within SAP. Administrative tab, start date, term date, kind of your really basic HR information. But also if you wanted to incorporate timesheets, you do have the ability to enter absences here. Personal and financial information, remarks, attachments. As always, SAP throughout has the attachments tab. But if you wanted to upload a copy of their contract here or some signed agreement, you can have that here. And then they also let you link out and pull in a picture of the employee. So a pretty basic employee master record. But when you start from this step and actually create the employee master record first and you click add, SAP is going to help you with the workflow a little bit and say, hey, you're adding a new employee master record. Do you want to also create the new user based on this employee master? So we'll go ahead and click yes here. SAP is going to add the employee master record and it's going to take us into the user setup, which is the next step in this process. And we're going to change the user code here as we have standard user codes. This is, as you may know, the user code they used to log in, and then their username is just their employee name. You can see it's already linked to the employee master record that we already created here, and it brought over their phone number. Branch and department is already brought over as well. Up at the top here, you'll see the super user option. Now this is for, as it sounds, your super users in the system that are going to have access to everything. So SAP, as we're going to see here in a few moments, does have a very robust authorization setup and system in place. Super user is a really easy way to basically give a user access to everything in the system. So this really should be reserved for your actual system admins, your super users, CFO maybe, to access everything within the system. Most regular users or functional users in the system will not have this checked. Down here, we can click our function button and set a very basic password for the user. And this step is important because they're not going to be able to log in without this password set, but you can set, a really simple password to start and then check this change password at next login button. So what will happen is you'll give the user the password you set when they go to log into the system for the first time. It's going to prompt them to change their password to something. It's a really basic but important security feature in most systems today. If we're not sharing passwords and we don't have passwords hanging out on Word documents anywhere for anybody to read. You also have the option to set passwords to never expire and the locked functionality, which is really for users when they leave so that you can lock it and then nobody can log in under that user anymore. As we go under the services tab here, you'll see again something Beth mentioned earlier, and we started at the company level and we want to bring it down to the user level now, where some of these functions and options are down at the user level. This is available as of SAP 9.3. We're in a 10.0 environment right now, but if you're on a version of SAP prior to 9.3, your screen will look a little bit different. But again, the display recurring postings on execution or recurring transactions on execution. If you set that at the company level, most sales reps, they're not going to be doing that anyways, or even have function or authorization to do that. So it might behoove us to just shut these off here so that they don't even have that option. Vice versa, you could set it all up on the user level here just for your finance users and turn it off at the company level. Again, screen locking time, this can all be defined at the user level. Down here, this show license information on startup. As of 10.0, one of the things SAP does when you first log in is you'll get this license information pop up down here, and it happens on login. And you have to click the SAP Business One logo down here to get it to go away. But you do have this option here at the user level to uncheck that so that it doesn't show it. Most users don't need to know about their license information. The next option is this use numeric keypad enter key as tab key. Now this is really a useful tool, especially when onboarding new customers. If you're familiar with SAP, you know the enter key adds documents or updates documents. And that might be new for some users, as they might be used to using the enter key to go to the next field. If they work a lot in Excel, that's probably what they're used to doing. This option allows you to change the enter key on the numeric keypad to a tab key instead. It might be a good training tool for them to help them learn the new system and understand the implications of hitting enter on the keypad as opposed to tabbing to a new field. It might also help them with their data entry if they're used to doing it that way. The next one is this enable document operations by mouse only. Again, really good when onboarding new users who are just learning the system. This only allows them to add and update documents by using the mouse. So it basically disables the enter key from being used. So a couple little tricks down here that might be useful for new users. And then the display tab, pretty basic. I'm not going to go into it, but you do have the option to set this down here at the user level as well. Great, so we are going to go ahead and add our new employee here, myself, and let's go back to employee master record. The next step is setting up the actual sales employee. And why this is different, you'll see that we already have a bunch defined here, but like all lists in SAP, we'll just go to define new, and we'll get into our sales employee and buyer setup. Why this is different is in SAP, you have document owners, and then you also have sales employees. There are sales employee fields on BP Masters on all marketing documents. This is the defined list of users that are actually registered as sales employees. So you can use it to set up your commissions, run some commissions, but it just filters that list down a little bit and allows you to have a defined list of your sales employees. One little tip on this, when you're linking a sales employee back to an employee, you do have to add the sales employee first, click update, and then come here and link it. Just be aware of that little piece. But once we click update here and update, nope, it's going to do it for us. I'll just click refresh. And now we have our sales employee map there. And again, you only need to set up your actual sales reps as sales employees in SAP. So now we have our employee master done, our user set up. They have a password that we've passed off to them so they can log in, and they have their sales employee record set up so now they can be mapped to business partners and listed as the sales employee on documents. The next step is getting them a license. So you're probably familiar with this, but real quick, as this is something that if you're setting up a new user, you might be able to do, especially if you already have licenses to do it. The license administration screen, also a quick little tip here, the maximize button didn't used to exist here. They added that finally in 9.3, I think, where you can actually maximize the screen. Not a big deal, but if you have a lot of users, it might be useful. So we have a list of users over here. We can hide locked users, so filter our list down a little bit. But we can see right now, if I click on myself as a new user, we actually have no available license to assign to this user. Quick, easy way to see this is under the Components tab. Your license will already be installed on the back end, but you do have a list of all the different licenses available to you. And you can see on the right side the total number of licenses in the file and the available licenses, which right now is 0. So since we fired somebody last week, who did we fire? Jack Black. So he got fired, so we'll go ahead and take away his licenses here as he doesn't have access anymore. And we can go ahead and reassign those to another user. We'll just click update. And now I have a license, which will allow me to log into the system and actually start using functionality. But there is one more step, which is authorizations. So if we go under administration, system initialization, and authorizations, we'll go to general authorizations here. We get our authorization screen. Again, you can hide locked users. Let me go ahead and click on one. When a user is set up in the system and they get a license, they get a few very basic authorizations under general, which basically just allows them to log into the system and log out. But if you're familiar with this screen, you'll know that if I expand this, SAP has a plethora of authorizations available to you, which really gives you a lot of functionality and a lot of control over what each user can do in the system. A good example of this I like to show is here under Business Partners. Adding business partners, we have options for adding customer vendor type master data and adding lead type master data. So it does get very granular on how it allows you to control functionality in the system. Now there is a lot here, and setting them up the first time can be very cumbersome. The easiest way to do it, and we're going to streamline this a little even more later on, but if you know a user is going to be fulfilling a similar task as a previous user, or replacing somebody, you can come down here, and we chose Jack Black, who we took his license a little bit ago, but he had authorizations here. We'll go ahead and click copy authorizations, and we can assign those to the new user just by using this copy authorizations down here and click OK, and it's going to confirm we want to pass authorizations off. Click OK, and now my user has all of the authorizations from the previous user. Down here, something that usually gets hung up on, especially for new users, is the max discounts. So the max discounts on the sales and purchasing side define how much of a discount a user can give on a marketing document, such as a sales order or purchase order. And usually this gets missed, especially if you have formatted searches or something that's defining a discount for you. This can prevent users from adding documents sometimes because this is not set. Most companies are okay just letting the employee give 100% and then having some approval procedure in place if that is the case. This is a sales rep who's not doing anything on the purchasing side, so we'll just leave that at 0. But we'll go ahead and click update here. So now we have the ability to set those discounts there as well. And okay, so we got our employee set up, and now the next step that Beth is going to take over is actually getting SAP to look and feel the way we want for this user. And this, as Beth will talk about, is really important, especially as we're trying to train new users in the system. It's really important that between all your users doing similar functionality, SAP looks and feels the same for them so that we can answer questions easier and help train them faster. Beth?
Yeah, thank you so much. So I won't repeat what Ben said, but this is really important, and I would say almost as important as the licenses and authorizations. So you obviously want them to have access to SAP, but you want them to be able to access it easily in a way that they're able to, again, do their jobs and have the tools that they need. So first, we're going to talk about form settings. So we've done a webinar in the past that dug into cockpits, dashboards, UI config, in a little bit more detail, and we'll link that in the documentation. But kind of from a high level, I want to give you some tools that you'll be able to use to help users define their form settings or help you define those for the user. So first and foremost, the menu form settings is kind of the easiest example of this. So with our menu, we are in a HANA system, so our menu form settings is just right here. But if you are in a SQL system, if you don't have any windows open, you'll be able to just access the menu form settings from your regular form settings button there. So with these form settings, they're really similar to our document form settings. This allows you to simplify the look and feel of SAP from the menu perspective. So if we're a company that's not necessarily using our, service module, we're not using MRP, we can hide those things from view so they're not cluttering up our interface here. We may also have some sub items, so the things underneath of these menu headers that we're not necessarily using, so we want to simplify that. We can go ahead and update, and now we no longer see those items in our main menu. On the same breath, we're able to go into any of our documents. So any of the documents that have this matrix style layout here, this child table essentially, can all be adjusted with the form settings. So when we talk about the user interface, that's everything outside of this. But when we talk about form settings, that's all this piece here, right here. So on any of the documents, you'll see if this form settings button is enabled, you're able to go in and update the table format here. The row format is a little bit different. So that's if you double click on that row, you're able to see some information that pops up in a sidebar. But on our table format, that is going to be controlling what we see on this line level here. So just like we did with the menu form settings, we're able to update what's showing here on these form settings. And I think we did get a message in the chat. So if you select to hide specific functions in the general settings screen, does it also hide them in the menu? Yes, so that's a really great question, and actually something we didn't talk about, but is really important to mention. So there is a hide functions capability here in the general settings. So if you're not using those, this is a way to hide specific functionality so that you don't even have to go to the form settings level to hide it. And it will kind of hide these from use in the system. So yeah, great question. Thank you. So outside of this, some of these form settings, if we're updating our menu or updating, our form settings at this level, all of that is just happening for me. So when I make, a specific, like our unit of measure code and our unit of measure name, I make those visible here. That change only takes place for me. But as Ben mentioned, especially when you're getting new users trained or maybe you've deployed some new functionality, and we want those users to be able to, come to you or come to maybe a colleague of theirs with questions and be able to have the same type of look and feel in the system so that we're able to, answer those questions or investigate things really easily. So one of the ways that we're able to do that here is in this user setup. And I'll go over to a specific user. Maybe we'll just pop into my manager user. So we can copy these user settings from me to a specific either set of users, a user group, which Ben will talk about, and we can actually get really granular with what exactly, which forms exactly that we're copying. So On this copy user settings, I've started with my user, and let's say now I would like to copy my form settings to Ben's user. So this is our new user in the system. We talked about our message preferences, so that is what the default answers are for some of those questions, our tooltip preview preferences, and also our form settings here. So at the form settings level, this is where we can get really granular, and this is a new functionality, I believe in 10.0 as well, where we're able to actually specify which form settings we'd like to copy over. So within that, prior to 10.0, it would copy form settings for all of these various forms in SAP, but we can actually, kind of pick and choose which ones we'd like to copy over. From there, all we have to do is copy. What it says there is it's just going to overwrite whatever form settings that Ben has currently set up for his user, and the process is complete. So it'll copy all of those over. So that's one way to, again, now as Ben logs in, he sees all of his forms exactly like I see mine. Now, in terms of the UI configuration, so this is everything outside of that line level information. We'll go back to our sales order here. Now, in terms of adjusting the user interface, SAP is a really flexible tool and makes it really easy to adjust how we see, again, everything outside of this. So on the UI edit mode, all I did there is click Tools, Edit Form UI, and you can see here we're in the UI edit mode. And so from this point, there are a lot of sometimes common things like bringing our logistics information, like our ship to, up into the header level, or certain things like that that we see fairly often. But outside of that, we can do things like maybe our language. We don't necessarily need to view that or have it kind of cluttering up our screen. Let's say maybe we don't print pick tickets here, so we can hide that information. We can also make certain things disabled so that it's still there for view, but not able to be edited. And then on our UDFs as well. So if you have any user-defined fields here, really easy to bring those things over to our main menu. We can align it and all of that kind of stuff, make it look nice. And now we have that information on the main menu. We don't have to keep this UDF screen open. So we can save our changes, leave our UI edit mode, and now our user interface is changed there. So when I did that, I brought, my revision number over here. That change just takes place for me. So same thing when we change the form settings. At this point, this change is just available for me. But there's some ways that we can enable doing this on a more mass level. So that is where our UI configuration templates come in. It's, in the administration menu under utilities here. So these UI configuration templates do that same thing that we just did on the user level, but they allow us to create basically a deck of templates that we can then assign to users or assign to groups, so that all of our, let's say our sales users see the sales order, the delivery, maybe the invoice forms, pick and pack, that kind of thing. We want them to see those forms in the same way. Maybe for our financial users, we have some more financial-based forms that we want them to see the same way. So we're able to create these different scenarios or different decks, basically. Each of those will include a set of forms that are applicable, and then the assigned users who will see those specific forms in that specific way. In order to edit those form UI, all you have to do is find the form that you're looking for. So maybe my AR invoice, and click Edit Form UI. It'll bring up that invoice in the UI edit mode, and we do the same thing that we just did on the user level to make those adjustments. We'll go ahead and get out of there. In terms of adding any additional forms, we can always, let's see, over here, if we want to add an additional template, we're able to add that and add it to our list here. Or if we want to add any additional forms, we have the drop-down list here. So that is the quick high level on our UI config templates, our form settings. A couple other things to note around that. So In terms of our field names, so this is something I think a tip and trick that we like to share with some caution around it. So again, with SAP being so flexible, we do have the capacity to, change different field names or menu names to fit the verbiage that we might use specific to our industry. So maybe instead of item number, we like to call this our SKU. So all that I did to change that is you press Control, you double click on the field, and then it brings up this changing description option. We can make things bold to let users know that this is really important information. So something like our customer PO number, just as a little reminder that these things are important to enter. Now, when I do make that change, it changes for all of the users. So this is something that as you might uncover this functionality or your users do, it's maybe important to go back, check through your authorizations and make sure that the only people that you want changing the field names are the ones changing the field names. And just another note on that, it does not change the name of the table or the name of the field in the database. So you don't have to worry about it breaking any queries or anything like that. It just changes the description that you see in your interface. So with that, I'll pass it back to Ben to cover some user onboarding and how we can use the tools, things that we've learned so far and some other tools to really streamline the process of user onboarding.
Thank you, Beth. Yes, so we've been talking for, let's say, about 30 minutes now, since we got a little late start on the webinar today. But even without all the talking, it still took us about 10-15 minutes to get a user set up in the system and set all their defaults. It might take longer depending on who the user is and what their function is. There are some tools built in out-of-the-box SAP that can help us do this quicker, and the first one is user defaults here. So user defaults are basically a template that you can set up for your user setup screen. And we have one here for our sales users. So we'll go into the defaults tab where you'll start seeing many of the same setups here for time format and date format that we are able to set up on the user level. But if we know multiple users are going to share the same setup, we can set it up as a template under user defaults. We have the same option here under display, the print functionality, and this is only on the user default setup. You can set up print preferences by user default here. So you can't do it here on the user screen itself, but you do have the option here for all the documents to set up options for this user group. So, for sales employees, for instance, maybe most people, when they enter a sales order, you don't want to print it out, but sales employees have to keep a record of all their sales orders, so they need to print the document upon sale. So we could set this up for our specific sales users in this group to have that functionality. Under credit cards, this could be used, and I'll go use my favorite tool here, fit column width. Under credit cards, this could be used, again, if your sales users are doing expenses and you have specific geo accounts you want their expenses to go to, you could have this set up here. And then finally, under the paths, you have the attachments folder. So for each of your different departments, maybe you want to set up a different attachments folder, you could do that here under user defaults. Now, once we have a user default defined and all set up, when we're setting up our user, which we did earlier, and I'll go back to myself here, we do have this defaults field here, which I skipped over initially, but we can assign our user defaults here and just click update. So instead of going through the display tab and setting all this up, we can just assign the user default here and it will bring in all those settings we've already previously set up. So this is a case where we can set it up once and then just use it for all users in that group going forward. The next one is even more powerful, and that is user groups. So user groups, and I'm going to click the drop down here just so we can see real quick, allow you to do something similar like what we just did with user defaults, but user groups allow you to set up similar authorizations, alerts, form settings, and UI configuration templates to, again, define once and then assign to multiple users or put multiple users in that group. So under authorizations here, we see different user groups already set up. we'll go under System Initialization, Authorizations, and General Authorizations. Let me get this a little smaller here so we can see. We've actually been seeing this throughout the webinar today because we have this Groups tab here, and Beth showed it on the UI templates as well. But you'll see they'll match up. So previously, when we had a new user set up, we had to either go set it all manually by clicking on the name and then going down the list and setting everything, or we could use the copy authorizations. The quicker functionality is when you first go live with SAP, or if you want to implement this now, you can. We can set up authorization groups or user groups. Click through here, set up the authorizations we want, and then on the user setup, let me jump back over here to user setup real quick. We have this groups field here, and if we click the function button, it's going to give us the user groups we have set up in the system. So we can assign a user to different user groups, whether it's for authorizations, alerts, UI configuration. And there's also an option for cross-all types if you want similar users to share the same configuration for all four of these other options. And again, these are available on the authorization screen, alerts, form settings, and UI configuration templates. So it's a really easy way to just come in here, create a group, and then start using that group throughout the system to set those similar functionality you want between users. So again, it's one of those scenarios where you can set it up once and then use it as you go forward and onboard new users and grow. Now, we want to get into a couple other tips, tricks, and admin tools you may not know about. I actually just got a text from Mr. Markley, and I did something that I didn't even think of pointing out. But on any screen in SAP, if you open a window and you can't see everything, you can go to View and click Fit Column With, and it will adjust all of the columns for you. Similar to what you would do in Excel if you double-click the headers, but you have that option here.
And for those of you that do like keyboard shortcuts, one of our colleagues, Travis, I mean, it seems it has the lines under them. There's a keyboard shortcut, so it's Alt-VF. So I tend to do that a lot. If you guys like keyboard shortcuts, something to keep in your pocket there.
Yes. Okay. What was I supposed to talk about? Okay. So next, we want to talk about add-ons real quick. So add-ons are additional functionality to SAP. Some of the most popular ones in the industry are B1 usability package, iPayment, Resolve add-ons. There's a whole bunch of them out there that are available to enhance the functionality in SAP. If you do have these installed in your system, or you do the install yourself, here under Add-on Manager, this is where the individual user can connect and disconnect different add-ons. But if you're doing the installs yourself, the pending add-ons and the failed add-ons for lightweight deployment might tell you additional information about why an add-on hasn't installed or why it failed to install. More importantly, though, under the add-on administration, we have a similar list of the add-ons. We can set a default startup mode for them. So if, B1 usability package, if you're running validations, most often you want that set to automatic so that it automatically starts when the user logs in and they have those validations running. But you do have this other tab here for user preferences. And what this is, and let me go find my wonderful myself. You can, here's a good opportunity, Fit Column With. Beth, did you take controls?
No. There we go.
Oh, there we go. Okay, Fit Column With, we can see the preferences are set to default for each of the add-ons for this user. But let's say, this user, he doesn't need to have BOYM starting or B1 usability package starting every time. So we have the option here to set that on the user level for the add-ons. Couple other things, and this one is one of those hidden utilities of SAP, is the Connected Clients functionality here under Administration Utilities Connected Clients. Oh, thank you, Beth. Beth was sure to log in a user this morning, so this screen wasn't blank for us. But this shows you everybody who's connected to the company and their latest login time. This is really important if you're doing upgrades to SAP or you want to add a UDF to the system or anything like that that's going to cause users to lose work. As you may know, if you add a UDF or a UDT or a UDO to SAP Business One, it will change the database structure, which requires everybody to close all open windows so that we maintain database integrity. With this connected clients functionality, before you do that, you can see who's connected to the database. You do have this super powerful option to just disconnect them and force them to lose work more appropriately, and so that you don't have any angry employees who are in the middle of a 100-line sales order. You can go to the send messages option here and send them a message and say, hey, I see you're connected. Are you still working? If yes, can you save your work? I'm going to be doing some database maintenance or something like that. So really powerful tool here to see who's connected to your company. And the login time I like, because then you can also find out who is not logging out at the end of the day and who's been logged into the database for 5 days. So that's a really useful tool, again, under utilities, connected clients. Alerts management, I'm only going to touch on this for a second just because it is different in 10.0, and I know 10.0 upgrades are going on right now. You are probably familiar with it looking like this, and you could navigate through them and set up your alerts this way. In 10.0, they changed it to have this grid structure so you can see all your active alerts, and you still have all the out-of-the-box ones here as well. But alerts can be set up on a user-defined query that runs for specific information and sends it out to a user or group of users. So if we go to actions and create user alert here, we can create a new query, set it to active, choose one of our saved queries here to set up on this alert, and then assign it to different users as internal messages or emails. We can choose it to go out on a different frequency, even a time of day. So if you wanted to set up an alert, and sales manager likes to see all new sales orders entered every day, you could have an alert fire at the end of the day at 4 p.m. and send them a list of all new sales orders in the system for that day. But this is also where we talked about alert groups. You do have the option to, again, assign multiple users to a group and then say, hey, I want this alert to go out to this group only. Save you a little bit of time there. Down to 5 minutes. Last couple of things, password manager. This is another one of those hidden features that I can never remember the menu path to. But password administration, especially today in this day and age, has become really important for systems to remain secure. And this can be even more important for clients that aren't running all their users on a terminal server. If you're running SAP locally, being able to set your security level here to medium or high, or even customize it to your needs. You can set expiration, requirements for the password, authentications before user is locked out, those sorts of things. So you do have this option here in password administration to change your password security level. Changelog, Beth, we are down to 5 minutes, so I will hurry up here.
You got time.
Okay, we got time. We started late. The changelog, and I'm going to actually go to a business partner for this, so ignore the sales order. Changelog, as you may already have a lot of use for, basically allows you to see all of the changes in SAP on any document or really any window at this point. Item master, BP master, sales order, invoice, all the way through. This has always been a part of SAP, and they continually expand it to include new windows. At this point, I don't really know of any that aren't included in changelogs, but it does give you a listing of all the changes. At this point, I just opened up this window via tools here and went to changelog. I could click show differences, and it will show me all of the changes in the history of this record, which might be great, but you can see this record was created back in 2011, so I don't really care about all that information. But if we come down and either just double click a line here, we get a record of historical instance of this record, and everything's grayed out, so we can't change it. But we can view what this record looked like in that point in time. But we can also come here and select 2 lines and choose show differences, and it's going to show us what was changed and by who. So Beth, here we can see change the group code from choice hotels to customers back on October 25th. So this is really good for audit purposes. It's also really helpful with training. If documents aren't being entered properly, or they're being changed later on, you can really go in and see who's making that change and help them, understand why they're making that change and correct the action if it's not the way your process flows. And the last thing I want to touch on here under tools is the access log. And this is another one that doesn't get a ton of use, but it is here and it is really a useful tool. The access log shows you all users in your system. And here on the basic level, it shows you their latest login, their latest log off, their last password change, and number of failed attempts. Up here, you can set a date range and then click details once you select a line. And it shows you the details of that user all the way through for that date range. So you can see when they've logged on, when they've logged off. You can also see, if they've had 4 or 5 failed attempts, that might indicate they forgot their password or somebody else is trying to use their account. So it is a really useful way to see who's logging into your system and when they're logging in, if you need to investigate anything. And with that, I think I'm going to pass it over to Beth to wrap up here.
All right, sounds good. So a couple things as we're wrapping up. We'll do some recap and share some documentation as well. But wanted to share just a couple quick help tool pieces. So if you do ever have, a question about some functionality, or maybe just want to give a tool to your users as they might have some questions, F1 is the shortcut key for that, or you can go to Help, Documentation, and Context Help, and that'll open up the SAP help information for your version for that specific form that you're on. So that sales order, that's where I was. It'll open up that basically context sensitive help there. Outside of that, there's lots of other functionality or different help links in here. So things like our SAP roadmap, the support and customer influence, where you're able to suggest different functionality that you'd like to be added to SAP. So definitely worth checking some of those things out as well. But otherwise, just to kind of give a general wrap up here, as always, we'll share this information, the documentation, all of that. Afterwards, the webinar will be recorded, or the webinar recording will be posted on YouTube. Our wonderful marketing guy, Matt, has been adding in chapters to these. So I know sometimes it's hard to scroll through a whole hour-long webinar to find that tip that you were looking for. So these will be a little bit easier to look through on our YouTube with those chapters being added. Outside of that, in terms of the summary, we covered a lot today, and there were actually some things that got knocked out. So if you have questions on those things, let us know. But covered a lot today in terms of the general high-level company settings, how we set up a user, give them their license and authorizations, how we control the way that they see and interact with SAP with the form settings and UI config, and then took all of those tools and brought it together in streamlining the user onboarding and what's available with our user groups and things like that. Outside of that, Ben ran through a lot of the administrative tools and utilities that are available in SAP. And on the documentation side, we have lots here in terms of documentation for you. So if you're not a part of our LinkedIn group, go ahead and join that. There's always tips being posted. Our YouTube channel, I've included a couple of the webinars that we've done in the past. And just a spotlight here, we are doing tips and tricks or tip of the week on YouTube. So these will be shorter, couple-minute tips that we've posted and gaining some, some assets there. So if you do want to learn some more tips and tricks, check that out. SAP Help Portal is always helpful. And then, of course, Pioneer, we're your partner, and we're always happy to help you if you have any questions around these things.
And the one new addition for this webinar in particular is we did put together a checklist of the steps for setting up a new user in the system. There is quite a few steps there and things that can be missed, so we did put a checklist together. We will have that up. Oh, Beth has it here. But it will also be up on our website as kind of a easy tool just to go through and make sure everything gets set up and assigned for new users.
And I apologize, I did miss 2 questions in the chat there. So Markley asked about stopping a user from being able to change a field name. So there is actually an authorization for that. And I can show that in just a second. And Brian, so can you copy a user's authorization to a group? So I'll show that really quick as well. So on the general authorization side, in terms of copying a user's authorization to a group, where are my, Ben, I'm in the wrong place. Oh no, there. Okay. So copy settings, this will copy it to specific users. Now on the group side, Ben, do you know copy
I don't believe
to a
you
group?
can.
Okay.
It is a feature request with SAP right now for obvious reasons. So no, you still have to set up the authorizations on the group level. But then once you do it once, you can give it to all your users that way.
Gotcha. I think the other thing, and great question, so the other thing in authorizations is you can set them at the group level. So that's one way that you could, set them from a group and kind of apply them to the user. So outside of that, and then Markley asked about stopping a user from being able to change a field name. So I'll have to, there it is. All right. Yeah, I thought that might have been a little bit harder, but so yeah, it's this renaming fields in here. If they don't have that authorization, as they go to rename the field, it'll just tell them they're blocked.
Yes, and the other thing we forgot to mention on this screen, little pressed for time, but authorizations in SAP are additive. So what that basically means is you actually have on the user tab here, you have authorization, which is their user authorization, but then you have effective authorization. And sometimes this column is off to the right, so you either have to scroll to it or use that wonderful tool, fit column with. But if we click into one of these here, Beth, if you don't mind, I stole your control.
Yeah, go for it.
Which one did I want to show? If we click into one here, we can see that, and this is a special case really, but if you click into the effective authorization, you get to see what authorization they have at which level. So at the user level, this user has full authorization because that's what we gave them. But at the group level, the group normally doesn't have authorization. So that is another way where you can have your basic templates for authorization set up at the group level, and then special scenarios can still be handled at the user level where, a specific user still might need access to something even though the rest of the users in the group don't. So that is an important thing to remember as well. All right, any other questions?
All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining. Thank you for the great questions. And as always, let us know if there are any topics that you'd like to see on future webinars. We're happy to cover them. And happy administrating.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.